Hi, welcome to another one of our vlogs about the say-do gap. Why is it people say one thing and end up doing another? And today I want to talk a little bit about objectivity and how in research we need both respondents and particularly researchers to try and be objective, and why objective measures are probably better. And I'm going to tell you the story about something called Project Alpha. And this was instigated about 40 years ago by somebody who I am a great admirer of. Sadly passed away last year, but it's this chap. His name's James Randi. Now, as a psychologist, as a scientist, I have many many idols that I follow, but he's unusual because he was a magician rather than being a scientist. He was very very well respected, very well known, one of the best known magicians in America about 40-50 years ago. He used to create tricks for lots of other magicians, including, he used to go on tour with Alice Cooper and created all his tricks for him. He was a very well renowned, if you know Penn and Teller, who are very famous magicians now, he was like their mentor. He just knew a lot about magic and how to do it. And he also, though, was famous for something else. He was famous because he was a great skeptic. And he had a real objection to people using his skills in a way that was trying to get them a sort of an unfair advantage in life. And particularly interesting was the fact that he, for example, he had lots of run-ins with Uri Geller. So Uri Geller appeared on the scene in the 1970s, and he was had all these kind of amazing spoon-bending techniques, and he could sense things, and he could do all this kind of stuff. And kind of James Randi recognized the bunch of kind of tricks that he used, except of course Uri Geller was trying to claim that he had some kind of special power that he was able to do. And most famously, he went on the Johnny Carson show, Coast to Coast in America, to demonstrate these kind of powers that he had, these sort of special powers. And it so happened that the producers, because they were in that kind of entertainment circle, knew James Randi. So they asked James Randi to sort of basically vet all of the tests that they were going to give him. And he knew, I think the one they were going to do was putting a metal ball into a little container, and then he could sense it with his hand as to which container it was. But the trick's actually done by, it's going to get me thrown out the magic circle, even though I'm not in it. If you move the thing that it's on, you can see one of the little cases, little containers wobbling a bit. And so that's how you do it. So that's how the trick was done. And he basically told them what to do, told them to put it on a table, to make sure it was rubber bottoms, make sure it was all sealed very nicely so they couldn't do it. And lo and behold, Uri Geller completely failed to find a ball on national TV. Didn't stop him having a fantastic career. In fact, you can sort of argue that Uri Geller is possibly one of the most successful illusionists that's ever lived, if not the most successful one. I mean, even though he started kind of like pulling doves out of the inside of his coat and pulling rabbits out of hats, because he was a magician, a stage magician in his youth. He has convinced many people that he has these special powers. So you could argue he's a very successful illusionist, possibly the most successful one at all. But James Randi liked tripping these people up because he was following in a massive tradition, a very long tradition of people who were great illusionists calling out people who were using these kind of tricks, these sideshow tricks if you like, to try and claim they had some of the greater power. And this goes back to people like Harry Houdini was doing it, because when people were producing ectoplasm in kind of spiritualist meetings, he knew how that was done, and he was all for and went around basically debunking a lot of the stuff that these people came up with. And this is basically what James Randi was doing. Anyway, but I started to talk about Project Alpha because Project Alpha was possibly the best funded piece of research into psychic phenomenon that's ever been conducted. It was carried out by this guy called McDonnell, who was the chair of McDonnell Douglas Airlines, and he desperately wanted to believe that psychic phenomenon existed. And he decided to put his money where his mouth was. He got a very famous physicist involved, who then set up a lab called the Mac Lab at Washington State University with the sole intention of being able to prove psychic phenomenon existed. So they sent the, he put about $500,000 in at the time, which 40 years ago was a huge amount of money. So they put the word out and said, okay, if you think you're psychic, please come and apply and we want to study you. And eventually they were going to weed them out and get them down to the people that they thought were the most psychic, and then they were going to study them. And these two guys, Steve and Ed, who basically pitched up, this is them in later life, but they applied, and through the whittling down process, they got to be the last two people who were showing these astonishing psychic powers. And they were the focus of the study of Washington State University and the Mac Lab for a number of years. And they would put them into various scenarios, and they were able to show proper interesting phenomenon where they were taking measurements, and it was all done in a very, very scientific way. And they were being really, really objective, as much as they felt they could be. They bent the rules a little bit now and again, but nothing too serious. So eventually they came out and said, yep, what we've done is we found these two guys and we can prove that psychic phenomenon actually exist. Except about a month or so later, Steve and Ed appeared at a different press conference with James Randi. Because what had actually happened is these two guys were acquaintances of James Randi. James Randi knew this was going on, and he knew that basically there was no evidence for psychic phenomenon. They had decided to apply for it to see if they could work to try and trick these scientists into believing that they were psychic. And over a period of time, they'd done this fantastic job of convincing these guys that they were psychic. And they basically stood up at the end and said, yep, we cheated. Absolutely, and here's how we cheated. Here's how we confused the scientists. And it was just the little things, those little errors that the scientists made that they were able to take advantage of. For example, they had one case where they were trying to make a little windmill turn using telekinesis. And one of them worked out how to do it. And they were meant to never speak to each other. But of course they popped out to the loo and they literally passed in 30 seconds. One was able to tell the other how to do it. And within like half an hour, he was doing it as well. And they were terribly excited about this. But at the end, of course, they ended up with a lot of egg on their face. And intriguingly, around that time, the CIA even were using and looking into psychic phenomenon. And when this big announcement was that this is what Project Alpha was James Randi's project to basically debunk psychic phenomenon. And when it came out, the CIA put a memo out saying, no, we're still going to keep studying it. Project Stargate, I think it was called, because they tried to use psychic reading to rescue help rescue the Iranian hostages that were held in Tehran in 1979. And I think it carried on for about 15 years afterwards, and they finally admitted it about a few years ago now. But anyway, so yeah, James Randi basically was this wonderful character who just knew how the tricks worked, and he didn't want people to fall into the trap of thinking that other people were special in the way they understood things. And I think a lesson for us as researchers is it's always good to be objective. And more to the point, it's always good to take objective measures from respondents. So with our VR and AR tools, we've built in what we call physiometric data, which essentially is where we record what the respondent does. And we have no influence that over whatsoever. So basically what we record is what the respondents do. And that objectivity is only a good thing for research, and it just makes research more predictive and takes that subjective interpretation out of the equation. Well, thank you again very much for listening, and please do join me again for another talk at some point very soon.